Yo, this is Chuck, and welcome to the How to Defeat Dudes video blog. So as all y'all can see, just like in episode 3, I think, of the show, once again Chuck's representing Butch Lee today. Not Bruce, mind you, but Butch. Yeah. You know, it always amazes me, right, with all the amazing technology that comes out of Asia, right, that there's some homeboys that still just haven't figured out how to use the spell check on their computers. Spell check, it's one word, click. This is like a few years ago. I had this student that I was mobbing around with this t-shirt that said, "I stole your sister's boyfriend." And I was all like, should I tell him? Nah, I'm gonna just let him figure it out. That is, of course, unless he did actually steal his sister's boyfriend. He just feels like bragging about it. The more power to him, I guess. But then again, we can't talk because you know what? Westerners do the exact same thing with Chinese characters. Not too long ago, I saw this image of this kid wearing a hoodie with this huge Chinese character on it that was supposed to say samurai. But what it actually said was hemorrhoid. Easy enough of a mistake to make. The character for samurai just happens to look almost exactly like the character for hemorrhoid. You know, what's worse is we actually get them tattooed on. At least usually they don't go quite that far. You know, for example, I saw this homegirl mobbing around in Tokyo with the Chinese character for peace, tranquility, and calmness. You know, tattooed right above her bumpty bump, right? And that would be cool if we were in China. But unfortunately, the Chinese character for peace, calmness, and tranquility in Japanese happens to translate into the character for cheap. It's not exactly the kind of label you want to be mobbing around with as a female over your posterior, I would think. I'm totally transgressing. A point, do your homework and use your spell check. Anyway, so for today's video blog, what I would like to discuss is BS in the martial arts world. Is there BS in the martial arts world? Of course there is. There's BS in pretty much everything. All that means, however, is that you need to take responsibility for deciphering what you think is true and what you think might happen to be BS. Now that doesn't mean I want you to run out there and be like, okay, well we do it this way and then those guys do it that way, so that means their way is BS. Don't ever do that. Or if your teacher tells you something that doesn't seem to make sense to you, then you need to acknowledge the fact that it doesn't make sense to you. Now that also doesn't mean that you need to be a total douche about it and like call them out in front of the class and be like, bastard! I've seen your kung fu and it's useless. My style is far superior. You know, just approach him or her after class and be like, listen, Sabonim, Sifu, Sensei, Coach, whatever. You know, I just couldn't quite get the merit in what we were doing and I'd like to understand why it is that we do this or why it is that we do it this way. Because the other thing that happens as well is that oftentimes when you look at something from the outside, it seems stupid or illogical. But when you have a chance to see it from the inside or you understand the logic as to why it is that it's being done, it actually makes perfect sense. One of the clearest examples that I can think of off the top of my head is the difference of the fighting stance to use in Muay Thai, for example, and in Taekwondo. Now, as a Taekwondo guy, when you look at Muay Thai fighters, the stance that they use seems so heavy. And you would think that makes them such an easy target to hit because they just can't move quite as fast off the line with that stance. And also as a function of that stance, they also need to step out first before they can execute a powerful round kick, which is another thing that would slow them down a little bit. But the reason that they do that is because in Muay Thai, you have to be very, very cognizant of low kicks and you constantly have to guard against low kicks, which means you need a very narrow stance that's very heavy on the back leg so that you can use your front leg to block when necessary. Now conversely, in Taekwondo, you know, you generally fight from this super wide stance that's really, really light on your feet. One, because using a really wide stance like that, you can generate a tremendously powerful round kick without necessarily having to telegraph it. And then also being in a stance that's quite light on your feet, it also makes you extremely mobile. So you can get out of the way and get in and get out really, really quickly. Now from the perspective of a Muay Thai guy, they probably look at that stance and be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, their legs are so open, it'd be so easy to just knock out their front leg. So both stances are perfectly logical and they both make perfect sense for the way that they're used. They're simply different. And by the way, this little difference is something that I discovered personally the first time Chuck had to step into a ring with a Muay Thai fighter. Homeboy just took my leg right out, right at the beginning of the match. Needless to say, had to learn to adapt very, very quickly. Ended up being the ugliest fight I've ever fought in my life. Fought to a draw. We went into sudden death. In the end, they gave it to him. I didn't agree with the decision, but whatever, that's how these things go. Anyway, the point that I'm making is that you only discover this kind of stuff when you cross the line into someone else's territory. Now, in terms of actual BS and not just perceived BS, the other thing to keep in mind too is that nowadays martial arts are very, very commercial, meaning that there's a lot of money in it. And as soon as you get a lot of money into something, then there's going to be people who want to buck the system, there's going to be people who want to try and cheat the system to make as much as they can. That's simply the nature of things. You know, you're going to have dudes who are all like, I'm a 97-degree black belt in Hot Quan Jiu-Jitsu, making up their own credibility markers or kind of, you know, inflating the things that they've done. just so that they could sell you a bunch of DVDs. Is stuff like that out there? Absolutely. So again, all that means is you need to stop and ask yourself, does this really make sense? And really do your homework and do your research on somebody before you buy into anything. Now, if you're training and you're doing something that, like I said, may not necessarily make sense to you, and then you stop and ask your teacher why, and he doesn't know, that doesn't necessarily make him a bad teacher. It just means that he may not have stopped to actually think about that particular technique or the application of that particular technique in some certain way. So, and if he's good, what he'll do is he'll just tell you honestly, I don't know. But you know what? Let me find out and get back to you. And then he'll learn from your question as well. And he'll thank you for it. At least I always thank my students when they make me think about something I haven't thought about before. Martial arts masters are not perfect people, and we're not superhuman. We all do it, and we're all guilty of it sometimes. Now, if he or she gets angry at you when you ask, then that may be a different story. I'll leave that up to you to decide. Okay, so the last topic I'd like to discuss is BS specifically in traditional martial arts. I think there's two reasons that you would see BS in traditional martial arts. One is because traditional martial arts are generally very old. They've been passed down from generation to generation to generation. And because they're so old and there's so much history and tradition behind them, students may not necessarily stop to think about how applicable certain things are anymore. And that might be a certain way that an exercise is done, or that might be a particular technique itself. You know, it could be that a long time ago, with sports science being non-existent or being, what it was decades ago or centuries ago or whatnot, it seemed like a perfectly good way to do stuff. But, with modern sports science, people are figuring out, okay, that isn't the most efficient way to move anymore. There's more efficient ways to do it. But simply because there's so much tradition behind it, people don't change it and they keep it the way that it is. And, conversely, the other thing that can happen as well is that a technique itself might be very antiquated, but training in it is still really good for you. A lot of the traditional weapons training is like that. Nowadays, ain't nobody going to be mobbing around town with a pair of nunchucks at their waist or, a pair of sai or a 6-foot staff or a bodor or things like that, right? Like, nobody's going to be walking around town with this stuff. But even so, training in that stuff is really, really good for your agility. It's really good for your physical sense, for your strength, and in particular, strengthen your fingers and in your forearms. All of which will help you fight better when you have to use these, when you have to fight with your legs, or, if you end up tangled up on the ground. Like, having an incredible amount of grip strength is useful for just about anything. Now, lastly, there's one other reason that I think you see a lot of the really wild BS, quote-unquote, techniques in traditional martial arts that a lot of people may not be aware of. And that is because a lot of the really old, really traditional, really conservative martial artists or martial arts instructors really do not care about what other people think of them. These guys don't care about money, they don't care about fame, they don't care about recognition. All they really care about is simply perfecting what they do. So that means when some disrespectful young buck runs upon them and are like, hey, I want to see if you're good enough to teach me, then they'll just show them a bunch of BS to make them go away because they don't want to deal with a student like that. Knowing full well that guy's going to run along to all of his friends and be like, that school's BS or that school sucks. And they know they're going to say that, but they just don't care. Because again, they don't care about fame or recognition, and they know how good they really are. Living and training here in Japan, I've seen this so many times. And I have a very strong feeling that there's a lot of masters in China and Korea who are also the same way. Not too long ago, I was speaking with a friend who trains in ninjutsu. And she was saying how some big TV crew would come to their school to film, but the director simply refused to respect the wishes of what the school's master wanted filmed and what he didn't. So the master just started making stuff up and then having his students BS it. This was like for some really big international TV show or documentary, right? But dude just didn't care. Another personal example that I can give from my own experience is not too long ago, I attended a karate demonstration. And over the course of the demonstration, some of the stuff was really cool, but some of the other techniques were just a little bit, So after the demo, I very respectfully approached the master, and he knew I was a master myself. And then I said, wow, I've never quite seen stuff like a lot of the techniques that you were showing. And then he said to me, well, that's because I just made it up. And I was like, damn, dog, really? Well, I didn't really call him dog because, he might take it the wrong way and we might have like some kind of public kung fu battle on our hands or something, but y'all know what I'm trying to say. And he was all like, yeah, I'm not going to show techniques that can be used to seriously hurt people to a whole bunch of people that I don't know. And he was all like, if they really want to know what I know, they need to come into my school, tie a belt around their waist, and get started and earn my trust. And then I'll show them something real. And that's just how we thought, and that's how he runs his school. And you know what? To be honest, I've been there, and all of his students are very, very good and very fiercely loyal. Expanding further on the demonstration thing, that's actually another thing that happens as well. The most useful techniques are generally extremely simple and oftentimes not very interesting to watch. So the martial arts developed this culture of having this really, really flashy stuff that they show to get people excited and to get them into it. and then having real stuff that they actually teach that's kind of a separate thing. The best example I can think of this is capoeira. Whenever you watch capoeira demonstrations, you see lots of dudes just flipping all over the place and everybody doing spin kicks like 5 miles away from each other. So then as an experienced martial artist, you're thinking like, man, how's anybody ever going to use any of this stuff? But then when you actually do capoeira, it's all about sweeps, it's all about takedowns, there's headbutting, and then people throw those spin kicks well within actual striking range, and if you do not move, you're going to get your head clean taken off. And that'll be your fault for not paying attention and not moving and not getting out of the way. The other thing is too, is that with capoeira, it doesn't come from the same kind of like religious or spiritual or sometimes military background that a lot of other East Asian martial arts do. Conversely, it was actually developed by Brazilian ex-slaves, destitutely poor people, and criminals. So needless to say, good capoeiristas pride themselves on their militia, or their ability to fight really, really dirty. So what happens is when you have dudes playing at really, really high levels, sometimes they just do things that just piss the other one off and they get angry and then just a fist fight will break out. And it just happens. Because at least in so much as I've seen, in the Hora or in the ring, anything goes. Now the thing that stops people from being really, really, really nasty all the time is that basically if you do something really, really nasty to the person that you're playing with, the next person to jump in is absolutely going to do the same or much, much worse to you. So generally, dudes try not to do that just because they don't want to get their kicked themselves. But when you actually watch capoeira demonstrations, all you see is a whole bunch of dudes just sitting there just singing and clapping, and people sitting there being like, woo, just doing spin kicks really far away from each other. Now, I'm not telling you guys this to make you afraid to do capoeira, because capoeira is so fun. And there's a lot of things about it that are actually really, really safe. Generally speaking, people play really nicely, and I've gotten far less bruises and things from capoeira than I have from any other kind of martial art. The point that I'm making is that there's very much a side to it that only people who do it get to see, that you never ever get to see in actual demonstrations. So don't underestimate it. So anyways, guys, this concludes my discussion on BS in the martial arts world. I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you have something to add, then please do so. You know what I mean? Please leave a comment. Please get conversations going with people. You know, so we can just flush all this stuff out. If you don't agree, you can feel free to say so. And if you want, you can even call me an idiot.
Chuck, you big dummy!
So anyways, as always, that's it. And
thanks for watching!
This is Chuck. See you next time.
Whoosh.
Garlic. My underwear is filled with bologna and my dog's poo is much bigger than yours.